Good morning, everyone. This is Data Sharing and Climate Action in Brazil. We are honored to have you all here joining us for this event. And without further delays, more than the delay you're already facing, but I guess you are all comfortable here, I would like to invite the person here that we are also very honored to receive, representing the Chancellor, Reverend Robinson Grangeiro Monteiro, the University Chaplain, Reverend Marcelo Coelho, for the event opening prayer.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everyone. It's a great honor and my pleasure to be here to speak the Bible reflection and opening prayer by Mackenzie Chancellor and Chaplaincy. Nice to meet you again, Joseph. I'm so glad with you here. I read in the Holy Bible in Psalm chapter 34, and my reflection will be about gratitude. I will bless the Lord at all the time. His praise shall continually be in my lips. My soul shall make her boast in the Lord. The meek shall hear therefore and be glad. Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. Gratitude, it's a very important to a good life, to our live a good life. In this psalm, David is sharing an important episode of his life when he was received from God an important deliverance for his life. He was seriously protected by God for his enemy, the King Saul. We have here my friend Reverend Ricky. Yesterday, he and his wife was stolen in your car. The thief broken the car glass and stolen his wife's cell phone. He and his wife received a deliverance from God about his life. This is common in our life. There is an important difference between a simple bless and an extraordinary bless. And we receive an extraordinary bless, we shall be truly grateful. So, we can be truly grateful looking for some aspect of the David experience in this report. First, gratitude, like a choice of the life. David says, I will bless the Lord all the time. Means are all the circumstances, all the feelings, be bad or good, and I'll be result my business are good or not, be on the wins time or lose time. What matters is choosing to be grateful. Second, gratitude like a live force. The King David chose the gratitude and praised the Lord, and this choice became in strange for the humbles. The text says, the meek or humble shall hear and be glad. The humble are those who are discouraged, sick, or injured, and when they listen the praise or rejoice or the gratitude, David's gratitude, they find force. They become strong. Gratitude, it's a love act. Finally, we can see the gratitude like an example of the life. David invited his listeners, oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. King David, doesn't withhold or keep to oneself his gratitude. David shared with his friends. The best wins are the ones we can share with the people we love. Here, in our university today, we are grateful to God for hosting his graduate law event. And we share with everyone our rejoice and gratitude. And my wish and my prayer is that you can be happy and strengthened in your journey and life. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend. And now for the opening remarks, I'd like to invite and welcome from Mackenzie University, coordinator of our PhD and master programs, Professor Maria Cristina Trigueiro Veloz Teixeira. The coordinator for Mackenzie International and Interinstitutional Cooperation, Professor Pedro Buch. The director of Max Planck Institute for Innovation and Competition, Professor Josef Drexel. Also from Mackenzie University, Professor Vicente Bagnoli.
Good morning, everyone. I am here to represent the Dean of our university, Professor Marco Tulio de Castro de Vasconcelos, and the Prorector of Research, Professor Felipe Chiarello de Souza Pinto. We are very happy to host this conference and the speakers from different countries to talk about the very important issue, the climate action in Brazil and in the other countries. For Mackenzie, this agenda is important because in different graduate programs, the environment is a crucial research topic. For example, the economic and political graduate program in our university. This conference is part of the internationalization efforts, not only at Mackenzie, but also for all the institutions that are present here for this event. I would like to thank Professor Vicente Bagnoli for the initiative, and to welcome Professor Joseph, director of the Max Planck Institute for Intellectual Property, Competition and Tax Law. And thank you for coming. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you so much.
Well, in 2018, in a UN Global Compact Leaders Summit, it became a shared belief that we are the first generation to feel the impact of climate change, and the last one who can make something, an effort to change it. And to make a change is not something really easy to do, because we need to address it in a research approach, but also it has impacts in terms of economic framework, political framework, so which requires a joint effort in order to tackle environmental change, greenhouse effect, and the issues that change in climate change can have, or in terms of negative externalities in economic growth. So it's not just a theoretical discussion, it has economic impacts. In order to reduce greenhouse effect, what we can do, it entails reducing deforestation, using products that can face and tackle disease. We need innovation to bridge the gap between reducing greenhouse emissions and also reducing poverty and also facing climate negative impacts. In that sense, this type of event or conference and workshop bridge this type of gap. It brings researchers from different backgrounds, it brings public authorities, both national and international authorities, and private sector companies that tries to develop a common approach to face this specific and also common problem. It is a good thing to say that zusammen stark sein, or together we are stronger, or juntos somos más fuertes, either from a German, Brazilian, Chilean, Colombian, Senegalese, or not perspective, Indian perspective. We are here sharing a common goal, a common concern, and a common approach. Thank you very much, Vicente and Joseph, for trusting in Mackenzie to be this venue for this ongoing initiative.
Hello. Good morning. Thank you very much for this very warm welcome. For me personally, it's like coming home. It's the third time that we actually engage in a collaboration and in an event here at Mackenzie. And the more often I come here, the more I really feel at home at your university. This time I think it's a very peculiar event. We will of course speak more about our project later on. I will be the first speaker in the first session. However, I would like to mention that I didn't come alone. You already hinted at the fact that this is a large research project that extends or includes 4 continents with partners not only in Brazil and Europe, but also in Senegal, in Africa, and India. And we have started the work quite a long time ago, earlier in the past year, and we practically met every 2 weeks, almost every 2 weeks, and already had two workshops of that kind in Senegal in March, and then in September we actually went to Bangalore, to India, and we discussed different topics. And we are now very happy to be here. And I think also for Brazil, it is a crucial point in time, because politics, hopefully, is about to change as regards climate protection. And it's a very good topic to be discussed, because this is definitely a global issue. But people need to act on the ground, which is very much the focus of our initiative. We want to bring benefits to the people, and not just to businesses and not just to governing parties whatsoever, right? So the perspective is very peculiar in this regard, and I think that is also the mission of what academia should do. Thank you very much. Thank you again. Muito obrigado pela convite aqui na Universidade de Mackenzie. Muito obrigado.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure and honor to have you all at Mackenzie Presbyterian University to join the International Workshop Data Sharing and Climate Action in Brazil. The setting of our debate is this modern building opened in 2016, the home of MacGraph, the Center for Advanced Research in Graphene, Nanomaterials, and Nanotechnologies. But the history of Mackenzie Presbyterian University dates way back to the 19th century, when Presbyterian missionaries and educators founded the then called American School in São Paulo. This institute represented a turning point in Brazil, introducing a series of pioneering innovative pedagogical and social practices, which were unheard of at that time. Racial discrimination in admissions was abolished. Co-ed classes were created, and physical punishments were prohibited. By 1891, a New York attorney, John Terrell Mackenzie, decided to donate funds to an educational endeavor in Brazil, which allowed for the creation of the first undergraduate course, civil engineering. The American School, or also known as Protestant College, was renamed Mackenzie College in honor to its benefactor. In 1952, after 6 decades of tradition in offering solid scientific formation, the Brazilian government granted Mackenzie the status of university, which celebrates this year its 7th anniversary. In the following decades, Mackenzie became one of the biggest and most reputable universities in Brazil. The law school, that celebrates its 7th anniversary next year, was established on the 11th of August 1953, which is the same date celebrated by the law community as the anniversary of the founding of Brazil's first law school in 1827. Mackenzie Law School is one of the most traditional and is ranked as one of the elite, as its LLM and PhD program just received grade 6, which recognizes its excellence as one of the best appraised programs in Brazil. But what brings us today and tomorrow at Mackenzie is an international research project entitled Regulation of the Data Economy in Emerging Economies, Shaping Data Sharing Policies to Promote the Sustainable Development Goals. Headed by Max Planck Institute for Innovation and Competition, coordinated by Professor Joseph Drexel. It is a remarkable occasion which allows us to exchange experiences and collectively create alternatives for building a better, fairer, inclusive, and more equal society in our countries. The data economy offers great potential for emerging economies to achieve sustainable development goals. However, data sharing policies must be properly framed to leverage this potential. This is the starting premise of the international research project, Data Sharing in Emerging Economies, led by Max Planck, in collaboration with international partners, Mackenzie Presbyterian University, University Virtuelle du Senegal, BML Mundial University of India, and National Law School of India University, Bangalore. The project aims to define a holistic normative regulatory theory on promoting data sharing that will help to fulfill SDGs. and further aims to develop specific policies for data sharing in emerging economies, and ultimately assist with possible legal reforms. The Brazilian focus is on climate action, SDG 13, due to its relevance to the country and the world, as well as the limited progress in achieving environmental goals, and especially the great potential to advance in this area by fostering the data economy. SDG 13 takes urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Professor Drexel and others, for instance, were stuck in Europe at the airport and had to postpone their flights to the snowstorm. Arriving in São Paulo, they could have hailed a boat instead of a taxi due to the heavy rain. According to United Nations, this is part of humanity's code red warning. Our window to avoid climate catastrophe is closing rapidly. The potential of data economy also brings together stakeholders that promote a transition to a more innovative, profitable, and less invasive business models. At the same time, it is essential to formulate concrete hypotheses in the field of competition, consumer protection, environmental law, data policy, and innovation. Before the workshop in São Paulo, we experienced a great sharing of knowledge in Dakar, Senegal, and Bangalore, India. Those workshops raised the bar and inspired us, but also compelled us to put forth our best efforts to bring together different stakeholders with specific skills from different backgrounds, different institutions, and a variety of nationalities to share their vast knowledge with all of us. Please, let me thank you all for having accepted the invitation to give your time and share your experiences with us today and tomorrow. But let me also thank the huge efforts of Max Planck and Mackenzie team directly involved to make possible this workshop. Each one of the speakers were previously selected for their background in their specific field. Before being invited, we hold meetings to understand how they could contribute to the workshop. Finally, the speakers were formally invited, and here they are. For 2 days, we have the unique opportunity to listen to and debate with the speakers in 5 different panels. I have no doubt that the workshop is a melting pot of ideas from different backgrounds, exactly how the city of São Paulo is. Finally, I would like to thank Mackenzie Presbyterian University, represented by Professor Maria Cristina Trigueiro Veloz Teixeira, coordinator of the PhD and master programs, and Professor Pedro Bucchi, for supporting this workshop. I would like also to congratulate and to express my gratitude to the Max Planck Institute for Innovation and Competition, represented by its director, Professor Joseph Drexel, for bringing us together to discuss topics that are so relevant to our people, our economies, in short, our countries. I wish you all a great and fruitful time in the workshop at Mackenzie and in this cosmopolitan city of São Paulo. Thank you. I guess I can invite the speakers for panel 1, and thanks so much Professor Maria Cristina and Professor Pedro for being here with us today. And Professor Joseph Drexel, please, you can stay in the stage.
So again, thank you very much for giving me the floor. It's now my pleasure to actually introduce you to our general research project, and explain where we are somehow, or to a certain extent. And some of our colleagues will then report on the earlier workshops that we already held in Senegal and also in India. The fundamental research question that we actually are pursuing to answer is, what is the right approach to the regulation of the digital markets in emerging economies? And here you already see that I put the emerging economies into brackets, because I think that all economies are somehow emerging, in the sense that no economy is actually fulfilling its objectives and purposes to actually respond to the Sustainable Development Goals in an appropriate manner. So the challenges are to a large extent similar and also the same. We all need to develop. We all need all economies need to innovate to actually answer the current challenges. However, what we also wanted to do, and what our particular focus is, to look in particular at the situation in emerging economies and get connected with the situation there, talk with people there, and actually also find out what initiatives we can actually find, and so on. Of course, the general outlook is a legal one, as you see from the question we are actually pursuing to answer. And there are three options for finally answering or finally defining the general approach to answering the question. The first approach concerning the future regulation of the digital economy would basically copying the law in other jurisdictions. So that's the approach of legal transplants. Yesterday we already had an event on the digital economy and the legal regulation of the digital economy, and I presented at that conference. I presented the evolving legal system in the European Union, which upfront seems to be very advanced. The European Union is probably the jurisdiction that is most active in that field. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that transplanting the European solutions to other jurisdictions, especially in the global south, is the best approach. However, the European Union has a certain tendency to actually include this idea of legal transplants into its trade policies. That's very clear. It's also take the example of especially of personal data protection, where the European Union tends to apply its law in an extraterritorial fashion. The other option would be to reinvent the law. What do I mean by this? This would start from the assumption, well, the situation in emerging economies is completely different. The law in Europe or in the United States is not a very good fit. Hence, we have to take our own approach and look for we start from a very, very different angle and then develop our own legal system in this regard. We already see this tendency in some jurisdictions, where, especially on the government level, and also I would say in global legal scholarship, we see an emerging debate on so-called digital colonialism. This is very much focusing on the big platform firms coming from the United States, in particular, the GAFAM platform operators that actually grab the data all around the world. They get the benefits, and nothing is given back to the countries of origin, and this creates an impetus also of governments in emerging economies to actually control the transfer of data and claim benefit sharing, right? That is a very, very big debate that we currently see. It's often also framed in terms of data sovereignty. We need to control our national data in order to achieve benefits from the economic exploitation of the data. The third option is more the one, I would say, that we often see in many fields of the law, and which probably will also characterize our own project. That is that the approach that, of course, we can look at other jurisdictions, see how the law works, but we need to adapt the approach to the local socio and economic context in the given jurisdiction. So the approach is very functional. We need to be clear about the objectives that we actually want to pursue, and then learn from other jurisdictions, but take into account the local conditions. Here I turn more to the digital markets now. Why are digital markets different? There are three factors that actually differentiate the digital economy from the traditional analog economy, if you allow me to use that term. In the digital economy, what we see up front is that we have huge economies of scale. So firms actually develop their business model, they provide services, and the marginal costs of serving an additional consumer are minimal. So this actually also creates a situation where big firms or firms have a large potential to grow enormously. Also the network effects contribute to this effect. We see many positive externalities by actually providing large numbers of consumers with identical services and connect people, creating those positive network effects. And the data actually moves to the center as a key resource for all those new goods and services, and policies around the globe have by now identified that the regulation of access and control of data is a key factor for the economy. That this is most important. We see this, for example, in competition policy, where we are now convinced that classical competition policy does no longer fulfill its role, simply because data can be used in many different markets. And if we follow the traditional approach of assessing market dominance in product markets, we simply missed the point that controlling large bodies of data then can be used in many different product markets. That we simply missed the reason and the very cause why those firms are so powerful. And therefore we also move for new tools to actually address the issue. What is also very important is that data are non-rival goods, meaning that the more people actually have access to the data, the higher the benefit will be. If one person uses some data, it doesn't mean that others can't use it at the same time. So data sharing is actually a goal that is now listed very highly as an immediate goal of the regulation in the data economy. So data sharing becomes a new paradigm, I would say, of legislation. What we should not forget, that is another very strong aspect of the regulation, that fundamental rights, public interests, and concerns regarding democracy move to the center, because data is also used for communication. Large parts of the data economy deal with human interaction, social platforms, and they redefine how actually politics and political debate actually evolves. And we all know this, how politics is nowadays influenced by conspiracy theories that are exchanged on the internet and so on. So the implications are actually huge. So we see concerns and we see huge benefits. I would like to start with the benefits. What are the benefits of data sharing? Digital transformation can actually be considered as a major means to address the huge challenges that we currently see. Whether it is about the health crisis, the pandemics, we can use digital tools to actually identify how the virus spreads and how we actually can better control the development of pandemics. Those 2 days we will talk about the ecological crisis, global warming, think about food, the food crisis. In Senegal we talked about sustainable agriculture, the energy crisis, think about public education. It's very important to have AI-based translation programs, not only for the major languages, but also for local languages, for example, in India, where we have a multilingual society, and for educational purposes, it's very important to also translate educational material into those local languages. And we have, of course, also many social crises around the globe. OECD already in 2015 identified how important data sharing actually will be for increasing the well-being of mankind. That was actually, I have to say, one of the first documents I read when I started to work on the data economy. I guess also for our work at the Institute, that was a crucial document on which we relied to discuss the first legal issues that actually popped up. Just to give you a short glimpse of what we are doing at the Institute, I think part of our work first very much focused on the issue whether we should have a data ownership right. That was how I personally came to the data law, to the modern data law, and our work at the Institute was very crucial to actually convince the legislatures on the European level and the national level that we should not do this, that we should actually move into the direction of data access and legislate on data access to promote data sharing. And here you see up front 2 publications. Both are available on the internet, by the way. The first is a book based on a conference that we held 3 years ago, just before the pandemic, in collaboration with the German Ministry of Justice. Germany had the presidency of the European Union at that time, and they actually wanted to influence the debate in that field to promote actually, as you can see, public interest goals and consumer interests by implementing new rules on data access. The book is available on the website of the publisher Nomos. If you have the title, I'm happy to share the slides. Then you can easily Google it and you can download the PDF. On the right-hand side, that was the major work we did this year with my team. Practically all of my collaborators here in the room also contributed to a position statement on the proposed new Data Act of the European Union. And actually the major part of it is a new data access right, which we worked very much also in the context with the collaboration with the Ministry of Justice. However, we didn't really like how it is to be implemented. So there are many flaws, and we are very concerned that it will not work. And there are many other aspects also controlling international data transfers, which we see very critical. And that is maybe also a particular aspect that we should take into account in our research project that we are doing now. We also collaborate with GPI, the Global Partnership of Artificial Intelligence, which is an initiative of the G7 group, but it's very open. Brazil has also joined it, and it's basically, it works with expert groups. I'm a member of the subgroup for data governance, and I'm very active in a group on IP, where we currently look at the contract laws regarding the sharing of AI training data and AI models. Highly interesting research project. So there you can actually see how differentiated also the issues are. We should also promote voluntary data sharing. That's enormously important, and identify why firms may not be able, they are willing to share, but there are many obstacles to data sharing, and we also have to address the obstacles. So it's not only about intervention by the state, and which we see very much in Europe. We also have to take a more open and also an approach that focuses very much on also on freedom of contract, especially in the international context. We have to be a little bit more differentiated as regards. There are different elements one could possibly distinguish. There is the Internet of people. It started with electronic commerce, which actually gave rise to the platform economy. A debate started in competition law on multi-sided markets. We have more sophisticated approaches here in this regard. But already here we see that society and actually changes. Why is this happening? We see that in the internet economy, the roles are changing. Consumers are not simply consumers anymore. They are also providers of personal data, which then can be used for providing the service and for many other purposes, especially for advertising whatsoever, targeted advertising and so on. So the situation is very different. The roles are changing, and also the internet has, as I mentioned before, developed as a major network for human interaction, also replacing to a large extent media, classical media. As you know, the newspaper industry is very much affected by the internet, and hence, which was a very particular focus of our research at the Institute, the Internet of Things developed, where we see a lot of innovation based on sensor technology, connected devices, and also here the economy and the markets change. Why are they changing? Think about a car manufacturer. In the analog world, a car manufacturer produced a product and sold it, period. And then the contract was concluded. There were maybe repair issues, contractual liability issues, but that's it, a sales contract. But now we are moving to a service economy, because the car manufacturer becomes more and more an operator of safe driving in a world of automated driving. This is obviously the case. And also automated driving requires a lot of interaction of many participants, also the state, right? With traffic regulation also involving safety issues and so on. So we have multiple contracts, permanent legal relationships. The permanent legal relationships, of course, should also raise some competition policy concerns. Because once you contract with regard to a particular kind of a car, you are automatically locked in maybe into the world. We call it nowadays a digital ecosystem of a particular provider. And in a system with multiple players, suddenly it becomes very difficult to actually allocate rights, which was a concern when we debated data ownership rights. Who should be the owner of the data? You actually end up to be to have huge problems to allocate those rights. What are the criteria for doing this? It's not so easy. And what we also see here is that IoT devices now enter all different sectors of the economy: production, the production level, retailing, also consumer behavior, especially when you take the next aspect, artificial intelligence, because automated decision making also enters the field of consumption. It's now maybe the AI-based personal assistant in your kitchen that actually orders food, and you may have very little possibilities to intervene on making a choice what kind of product or what brand will actually ordered. Here you can actually see that this is changing the markets enormously, and in addition, we may also be concerned on what this actually means for individuals, also for future societies, where people are no longer making independent and not obliged. They are no longer obliged to make their own independent economic decisions. They are replaced by, their decisions are replaced by artificial intelligence. Can they actually act responsibly also in a political arena as citizens when they actually vote? How does this actually change human behavior? And I think psychology plays a major role, social psychology in particular. So a lot is changing here. Digitalization, what is at stake? What we see with regard to the technology part, this is really creating a lot of innovation in many sectors, manufacturing, commerce, but also the public sectors. We can make use climate change, digital technology for actually addressing issues of climate change and ecological problems. So that is digital technologies become the major means for actually responding to the challenges, current challenges of mankind. But there is also the industrial policy dimension, which we should not forget, especially for also and especially for emerging economies, because if jurisdictions do not take part in this digital revolution, you may lose international competitiveness. So in the global arena, engaging in digital innovation, employing digital innovation in your country, that is very important to be competitive in the future. Digital technology is, however, a general purpose technology and may also have the effect of disrupting the situation in many sectors. So also many firms actually have to leave the market if they do not adapt to the digital revolution. We saw this several years ago when we started our work in that field, when we talked to German firms, which became very, very active in that field. They simply said, we don't need IP rights anymore, because if we don't invest in as an incentive for innovation, if we don't invest, we will have to leave the market in a couple of years. So we don't have any choice. Whether we want to or not, we need to invest in that sector. And what is also very important in that field from an innovation perspective is that a lot of innovation actually starts or comes from startups. Also people that leave the university and then have great ideas. We saw this both in Senegal and India, where also people who have a very strong public interest commitment engage in the digital economy, actually establish and run startups and develop new applications that immediately serve the interests of many, many citizens. And this is very important also, that we should not only focus on controlling the big platform economy, we should especially also create an environment, a legal environment, where actually startups can develop and produce those positive effects for the citizens. There is also a financial constraint. Digital technologies need infrastructure. Investment in infrastructure is enormously expensive, and of course, especially in a large country, the challenges might even be bigger, and there are constraints. However, digital technology also allows leapfrogging. Think about mobile telecommunication. Mobile telecommunication immediately spread, for example, in Africa, very, very quickly, when there were no landlines for internet connectivity. Smartphones became enormously important and allowed many countries to actually move very quickly into the digital era. What we also need to avoid is the digital divide, and I think digital divide has two dimensions. The one is the digital divide between different jurisdictions. On a global scale, we have to make sure that countries are not left behind. All countries should have a chance to actually participate in digital innovation and in the benefits. And also within jurisdictions, we also have to make sure that all citizens benefit in order to avoid a social digital divide. So people need to have access to digital technology. So that is very important. As regards the legal challenges, they are equally huge, because we have established laws that anyhow apply to the digital economy, laws that apply horizontally, but they were not made for the digital economy. That is already true for personal data protection in the European Union, which has been applied since 2018, but it has a long story, and the work on it started much earlier, and it was adopted in 2016. So the very modern digital economy was not, I would say, the background of that legislation. And competition law, certainly, I guess many of you have a competition law background here. We are nowadays all agree that it needs to be reformed. And we have to also think about what the role of intellectual property is in this new environment. Intellectual property rights might be a big barrier to the sharing of data in many instances, and we need to analyze the role of IP much more closely. And AI also plays a particular or creates particular problems or issues to which extent we actually have protection in that field, and what is protected. And I have to say, in my work with GPI, that has become a major issue, because we don't know. The old laws have not been tested by the courts with regard to AI, and hence there are huge legal uncertainties. Private law is equally challenged, so there are parallel discussions among private law experts, scholars, who think we have to modernize. Our civil codes, and it's wrong to only look and focus on tangible goods in property law. Hence, we should adopt also property rights for data. I only have to say, hey, listen, that's wrong. The economics is different. Tangible products are rival. Data is non-rival. So introducing property rights has very different economic effects on whether you have property in tangible items or non-tangible items. So be careful. IP lawyers know this. So we actually have to communicate much more. There are many other issues. In the most recent proposal from the European Union on the data economy is on how to reform product liability rules with regard to AI applications, AI products, right? In terms of ethical standards and human rights, fundamental rights, because application of AI can produce discriminatory effects in many societies. So there are completely, as you can see, completely new issues, but we have to give the answers also in the context of existing laws. There are, however, also new approaches. Data access rights is such a new issue. We need new legislation. Also, horizontal regulations pop up in many contexts, especially related to competition law. You all may have heard about the Digital Markets. We discussed Markets Act. We discussed a potential Brazilian Digital Markets Act yesterday. We have to look much more closely at the interactions of the different fields of the law. You are no longer allowed to be a specialist in one field of the law to actually give good answers to digital issues. Private law and public law merges. I think that is also a very important aspect for the discussions for today and tomorrow, because in terms of new applications to respond to the challenges of climate change, data sharing between the state and the public sector will become very important, right? And there we actually leave behind the traditional division between private and public law. What is the right approach? The first one, I mentioned it before, and that is a very strong focus around the globe. I think currently that the focus is very much on fighting the strong market power of multinational platform operators, the government firms. I mentioned this notion of digital colonialism, which becomes stronger and stronger in the global south, but also in the United States. We have the new Brandesian School of US Antitrust Law that actually advocates to go back to the past, to have a more interventionist antitrust enforcement policy. The Digital Markets Act may be the child of a different way of thinking. And I mentioned what kind of consequences this already has. Governments think of personal and non-personal data as a national resource. They tend to implement data localization requirements and actually claim benefit sharing in regard of making use of the data by especially foreign firms. The option 2 is the one that we prefer, I have to say it up front, where we actually want to use data law as an engine for sustainable development goals. What does this mean? We actually want to put data sharing at the center of digital policies and then adapt the rules. The argument is to adapt the rules to the local socio-economic circumstances to create immediate benefits for the citizens, right? And that could, as I mentioned at the very beginning of my introduction, this should also apply in the global north, because also there we want to create those benefits, right? It should serve, and the sustainable development goals, I think they matter for the whole world. It's not only, these are not only sustainable development goals for the global south. If you compare the two, you immediately see what is wrong about the first approach. It has one pro or one strong argument. There is a true problem with the big platform economy. We have to regulate them. I fully agree. However, this does not mean that under the second approach we can't do it. We should equally do it, right? So that is not the problem. There are other problems where I think the second approach is the better one to respond to them. First, the first approach does not go beyond the platform economy. It has only this focus. While there are many more, and this is why I described the different aspects of the digital economies. There are many more players with the IoT, where the manufacturers come much more in, classical manufacturers come much more into the picture, and AI spreads everywhere. So it's not only about the big platform economy, so we should rather broaden the perspective. The first approach is also very static because it's very much focusing on benefit sharing, the benefits you actually get, and we want to distribute them. It's very much about a way of thinking in terms of commercialization of the value of data, while our approach is more dynamic in terms of innovation, right? And create additional benefits that so far we can't really produce, right? So that is a more dynamic approach focusing on innovation. And that is, of course, very closely to the mission of our institute in Munich. Also, to be true, who knows whether data sharing takes place on a global level? The money that actually ends up in the pockets of the government will actually reach the citizens. Who is guaranteeing this? This is very much a matter of the decision of the governing parties, and there might be a huge risk of failures. And how will you actually distribute it? That is a big issue. While if you focus on the sustainable development goals, you immediately get the benefits for citizens. So what about the sustainable development goals? You know about those, you probably know about those 17. And we have actually looked at those 17, and I made the exercise myself to actually connect those 17 Sustainable Development Goals with what we are doing in the digital sector, and you practically always find a connecting point. I want to also provide you with an insight that we had very much at the beginning, but which was not that obvious at the beginning. But in our debates at the Institute, we very quickly realized that there is a lot of interaction between the different Sustainable Development Goals. I'll give you a very clear example of experience we made this summer in Europe. There is number 7, affordable clean energy, and of course there is number 13, climate change. How do they relate? My example. In Europe we have a big debate whether clean energy is also nuclear energy. Right? People disagree, heavily disagree. If you want to bring down, or if you want to do something for climate change, maybe you should go for nuclear power plants. However, what we saw this summer is that nuclear power production can be affected by climate change. Why is this so? This summer, Germany had to provide electricity to France. Why? It was a very dry summer because of climate change, and 50% of the nuclear power plants in France were not operated, to a large extent because there was not enough water in the rivers to cool down the power plants. So even climate change can stop nuclear or the production of nuclear and or electricity based on nuclear, produced by nuclear power plants. So that is maybe not something that we thought of before. So we need to think in terms of connecting those different aspects, and that is true for practically for all different aspects and all different applications you may apply. And I think that's especially true for climate change because it has health implications, social implications, and so on and so on. This is the slide that we started with last year for describing the project. I'm happy to provide it to you. I don't have the time to go into the details. I only want to mention the methodology because it's very interdisciplinary. We have to include the business sector and learn about what is actually going on in different jurisdictions. And this is why we are doing those workshops. So the workshops is very much part of our project. And based on this, we actually want to have more insights on how the law should be actually started for the very purpose of maybe at the end to provide some insights. I think what is also very important, and that is the global approach, that we also want to establish a school of thought in that area that is global, right? And that we also want to spread to many different jurisdictions. These are the partners. We started in Munich, and we very much relied on people that we knew. So Vicente Bagnoli, Professor Bagnoli was also, we have had a collaboration over many years, and he was also a visiting scholar at our institute for a couple of months. And people in India and Dakar, they were former scholarship holders at our institute, even some of them, 2 of them PhD students of mine, and of course that is a particular personal benefit, I have to say, that I now can also collaborate with them after now, as they have become law professors at very prestigious and cutting-edge institutions in India and in Senegal. I would like to mention that also in Senegal, Moore is here. He works at the first digital university in Senegal, and the Max Planck Institute gave him a grant for building up a Max Planck partner group. And that is also a policy of my institution, to actually help people who in the past worked at the institutes and go back to their countries of origin to create more scientific and research capacity in those countries of origin. a very, very good approach, and my thanks also in this regard go to the Max Planck Society supporting us in this, on this project. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you now better understand what this project is all about, and you will now hear about some insights from our colleagues from Senegal, from More or Minata. It's for you to decide, and also from our Indian colleagues. One of them was not able to arrive yet because of the problems on the flight. He arrived, but without the luggage. And I guess it will be Vikas who will then report a bit. Or Shraddha. Okay, very good. Okay, I give the floor to the next person. More, it's you.
Good morning, everybody. So it's a pleasure to be here to share some thought on what we have done in Senegal in the framework of this project. But I would like first to thank our guest, Professor Vicente, for the kind invitation and welcome, and also his team. They have been very helpful in the whole process of preparing our trip from an administrative and scientific point of view. Thank you, Vicente. Thanks also to Professor Drexel, the Max Planck Institute, who have somehow put together this project and managed this project, which is international. So yesterday, when I was discussing with my colleague, I mentioned that this is really a very interesting and exciting project, because it's not only somehow organizing a workshop in Munich and in Dakar and putting together scholars, discussing, and at the end having a publication. It's more like going into the ground. Professor Drexel talked about approaches in terms of regulating, copying and adapting to the context. And I think if we think about legislation and trying to adapt a law into the context, it's very important somehow to have a very good understanding of the context. And I think traveling to Dakar, to Bangalore, and also to Sao Paulo help us discuss with all the stakeholders involved in the topic to better understand the context, and from there somehow think about the legislation. And thinking about legislation, when I heard Professor Drexel yesterday's talk and today's talk, connected with what we're doing, I'm still somehow puzzled on when we're gonna achieve what we're doing, because he spoke about complexity And I think it's a huge task, and it's very complex. Because when you talk about regulating the data economy, we're trying to connect it with sustainable development goal, but it's not only one piece of legislation, as you mentioned it. We have competition law, we have intellectual property law, we have data protection law, we have contract law, and now how to have a very somehow harmonized approach, having law talk together in a very harmonized way in order actually to regulate the data economy. When I read our objective in the project, which is somehow to give guideline on how to regulate the data economy, the digital economy, and connect it to sustainable development goal, but at the end of the day, the end product will be somehow having each piece of legislation and making each different piece of legislation talk together. And I think it's really a huge task, but starting with somehow thinking about the perspective, identifying the issue, and connect it to what is relevant from a perspective of a developing country. And the approach you talk about somehow between having just, because it's really, we heard it a lot in Senegal when we talk about digital economy. We need to regulate platform. We need to somehow delocalize our data. We need to control our data. And this thinking of sustainable development goal and how to approach the issue in order actually to make it a benefit for everybody, for the whole society. And I think we're not aware on that approach yet. And I think the school of thought that you're talking about, it's something really, it's a challenge for us, and it's something really what we have to implement. In Dakar, and what is interesting about this project is also it's country specific. Here we're talking about climate change. In India, we talk about health issues. In Dakar, we talk about agriculture and financial services, which are very, very important in the digitalizing process of the data economy in Senegal. And here I would like to acknowledge the great work that have been done by Team Dakar. I mean, he's part of the Team Dakar, but he's not from Senegal. He's thinking about, getting a Senegalese citizenship now. So my colleague Young, Dr. Minata, and Dr. Bego, who have really done tremendous work in preparing the workshop in March and also to working on the draft. So Strada, finally we get the minutes ready, and we are really very advanced in in the report. So, and this presentation will build on what we have already presented in India. In India it was more methodological, but in the meantime we have done somehow, we are advanced in the process of thinking and putting everything together. I mean, the first slide is just the reminder that, the departing point is not giving intellectual property on data, but data sharing as an enabling aspect for achieving sustainable development goal. But to reap this benefit, somehow the approach is very important. And in Senegal, we focus on two sectors: the agricultural sector and the financial services sector. That will help somehow as a starting point in order to analyze how we could approach the policies and give guideline also that is applicable to different sectors. Why those two sectors? In Senegal, it's considered in West Africa as really very well advanced when we talk about the digital economy, the regulation of the digital economy, and as Professor Drexel pointed out, from a private perspective, actually, and Jörg will come back to that, and that also some the insight we get from the workshop. It's very active. There is a very active private sector with a lot of startups that are very active in the digital economy, providing solution in different fields, in the agricultural field, in the financial services field. And also this process is also backed up and accompanied by also a policy, a will by the government somehow to go in that line. And in this framework, recently, if I'm not mistaken, in 2020 there is a new law on startups, whose aim actually is to push and support the innovative startups. In Senegal, when you think about policy, you have to think about policy orientation first. And the first aspect of the workshop was somehow to analyze what is on the ground, but also to discuss the orientation of the policy And recently, while working on somehow the existent, what do we have in terms of legislation in Senegal, we discovered that there is no somehow data governance framework or a policy document somehow regulating data. There are some orientation which is put forward in the Senegalese digital strategy, but from 2016, whose aim is from 2016 to 2025. This is a mistake. Who put forward somehow some objective in terms of regulating the digital economy. And in the Senegalese digital strategy, the agricultural sector and the financial services sector are of paramount importance. And here some objectives are highlighted. For instance, the agricultural sector, the aim is to digitalize the sector in order to boost productivity. And also a number of tools have been identified in order actually to help achieve this objective. That, helping, backing, and having business models that help have access to information on creating marketplaces on prices, the quality of soils, reliable data on the weather, or new agricultural innovation. And we have discussed a number of their business models in the workshop that we have on data. And in this process, what will be the role of data? And of course, accessing and sharing and processing data is very, very important in this process of creating this startup, creating these solutions. The financial services sector is also identified in the Senegal Digital Strategy 2016-2025 as an important objective, whose aim is actually to develop e-commerce and financial services in order to achieve financial inclusion. Leapfrogging is very, very, very important, as Professor Drexel out. The mobile money business, the mobile money industry is very, very well developed in Senegal. And here, the tools that have been identified in the strategy is actually to make sure that you have a high, very increased internet penetration. Infrastructure is important, so there are a lot of investment in telecommunication services, so making sure also that interoperability takes place, and this is the case in the law on electronic telecommunication, that also which has a link with additional services such as financial services in terms of mobile banking and mobile money. And here also, as in the agricultural sector, data sharing is very important, but interoperability also is of paramount importance. When somehow reading through the policy documents, the Senegalese digital strategy, we realize that achieving sustainable development goal is part of the overall objective of the Senegalese government. And this is really very, very much linked close to the approach we have on the project on linking somehow digitalizing the economy and also achieving sustainable development goal, which somehow highlights that somehow what we're doing in terms of policy approach, in terms of research, mirror what already the Senegalese government have in the process of digitalizing the economy. So there is a close link between the digital strategy and the scientific approach of the project. Now, when we make the exercise of going together through different laws, through different policy documents that have been adopted since, I would say, 2018 in order to regulate the digital economy, there have been a number of laws that have been adopted, and which aims actually to regulate the digital economy. We have a law on information society, we have an e-commerce law, we have a data protection law, we have this recently adopted law on startup, we have a law on telecommunication. But what we notice is from a legislative point of view, you have different law without having a kind of coherent policy approach. I mentioned this 2015-2025 digital strategy, but before the digital strategy, there have been pieces of legislation that were adopted in order actually to give key orientation on what the information society will be, what the digital economy should be. And here, there is a very important piece of legislation. It's called the law I would say, I call it law/policy, because it's a law, but it's more like a policy document on the information society that is adopted in 2008, which put forward the key principle in the process of digitalizing the economy. And the aim is to create an enabling environment for the digital economy that is conducive to investment, sustainable growth, and sustainable development. And here the SDGs comes. There is also the aim to need to balance innovation and access to data, and also protection of individual right. I'm going to come back to that, because privacy is very, very, very. When I was coming, looking, observing, this strategy is in the process of being kind of changed, and I still have to have a look on what will be the change that will be done in this strategy. But in the current form, a number of aspects that have been highlighted as overall objective: open and affordable access to network and digital services is an objective. Digitalizing the administration, we already talk about that, which is very, very, very important. Promoting innovative digital industry, and I think this is in line with the law on startups that have been recently adopted. But what is important in this strategy, and which also is in line with our project, is the objective, the goal of digitalizing key sectors of the economy. And it is clearly mentioned in the strategy that the agricultural sector and the financial services sectors are very important in this process. And I think that is also the reason why in Senegal we decided, when choosing the topics, to focus on those two aspects, the agricultural sector and the financial services sector. But still, there is a lack on guidance on the specific issue on the principle of data access and data sharing. Now, from the perspective of the regulations that are applicable to data sharing, there are a number of rules that include principles, regulations that are relevant for data sharing, and starting off with two pieces of legislation that are very, very important. And here, what we really notice when we are doing this legal analysis is that we have a data protection law. A data protection law which could be considered as horizontal, and whose principles are applicable actually in every piece of legislation dealing with the digital economy that include personal data. And the law is adopted in 2008, and also there is a regulatory authority that is tasked with enforcing the principle. And if you look at the law, it's really very strongly privacy oriented. And from a perspective of businesses, there are a lot of formalities one has to fulfill before collecting and processing the data. When we had the workshop in Dakar, that was actually one of the major points, that compliance with the data protection law was very, 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 very burdensome, and this impact a lot somehow innovation. With regard to the specific issue of data sharing, of personal data for B2B perspective, it's in principle it's possible, but there is a requirement of consent, proportionality, and security are also additional requirements one has to fulfill in order to share data between businesses. And this highlights the importance of contract law. International sharing of data also is possible in principle, but you have to have the go-ahead of the regulatory authority. There is a law on public sector information also that has some principles on collecting and processing personal data. We have a 2004 statistical law and statistics that was revised in 2010, which has a decentralized approach of collecting public sector information, which are centralized by INSD, that's the agency that somehow deals with public sector information. But when it comes to data sharing, it's really very murky. It's not clear on which principles somehow are applicable in order to share public sector information. In practice, the agency developed principles. There are some type of public sector information that are open to access type of public sector information that are not open, that you have to access on demand, and some public sector information that you have to actually pay in order to get access. But this is not somehow being regulated in the law, so it's just a result on practice. And of course, then non-personal data is not addressed. And this framework, as Jörg will put somehow, as we analyze it, will have a lot of impact on data sharing in the two sectors that we plan to that we analyze in Dakar, the agricultural sector and the financial services sector. And I'm gonna leave my Senegalese colleague Jörg to tell you about data sharing, the principle, and how they are applicable in the agricultural sector and the financial sector in Senegal. Jörg.
Yeah, thanks a lot more for the kind words in introduction. I will just continue, and as just more mentioned, we also had a workshop in Senegal, in Dakar, in March this year, and we also did a multi-stakeholder workshop where we invited a lot of people from agencies, also from the business, and also from the different areas that we were really interested in order to really look at the socio-economic specialties that are also there in Senegal. And I'm going to just wrap up our preliminary findings on that, because as more mentioned, we looked at the agriculture sector and the financial services sector. Looking now at the agriculture sector and how digitalization actually occurs, we have to start that there is no sector-specific data governance framework. What More just referred to was really a horizontally applicable legislation, like data protection, public sector information that is sector-specific, but in general, everything that exists in Senegal is horizontal. And that is extremely interesting from the perspective of Europe, where we are targeting really towards more sector-specific regulation. So that is the real starting point here in the end, but without, even despite not having that sector-specific data governance framework with access rights, there's still a lot of development of different business models that rely heavily on personal data, non-personal data, and public sector information. We see that private actors are really dynamic, so we have startups, we have actually like a lot of new business models occurring in the market, and they actively provide all the right incentives for or help digitalizing the agriculture sector. So, and I think most importantly, I think that is another factor of what Professor Drexel just mentioned, the public actors are becoming more and more pivotal and important in that regard, and that is also what we see in the agriculture sector, that a lot actually happens from the public actors, like public institutions, universities and other research institutions that are actively collaborating and are actively coming up with very interesting projects where data can be used for digitalizing the agriculture sector. But we also have still a lot of issues in that sector. We still see behavioral market failures that actually remain, that relates pretty much to a digital divide. So we still see that a couple of people are very much, like also from this educational perspective, literate with digital business models. So question here again is, of course, to what extent can make use of already existing digital business models in that regard? Is a data business model something that is being understood? And here we still see a couple of issues. Also from a contractual point of view, are there already kind of data licenses and contractual agreements with regard to data sharing? No, that is something that we haven't seen so far. Still, there is a lack of trust if it comes then to also making use of the specific data. And what a recurring theme in that regard was always also the issue with the data protection compliance that a lot of stakeholders were raising. That's what Morris already mentioned. And we still see a lot of lack of clarity of rules and principles on sharing of public sector information. If we now look at the financial services sector, it's the same reality here. We don't have a sector-specific data governance framework in place. But, and I think that is the really peculiar aspect in the financial services sector, is that there is a very dynamic market of telecommunication services and related services, and the financial services sector builds heavily on exactly that telecommunication sector because there is the infrastructure in place. So this is also what we heard in the very beginning, what Professor Drexel just mentioned, that this is really one of the key aspects that we need with regard to digitalization. We need the right infrastructure for actually these data transfers, and that in heavily, of course, costs a lot of money, and that of course then also relates to, I mean, in this particular case, a wonderful potential of leveraging where the already existing very dynamic telecommunication services might enter other markets, and so we have the mobile payments in that regard, which is a wonderful example that here data sharing is actually heavily influenced in the financial services sector by the telecommunication services. This also has, of course, a lot of competition issues if it comes then to maybe blocking others and not providing access. That is another theme that also I think from a regulatory perspective was addressed in Senegal. So we have rather a lowering of entry barriers of firms by providing universal access obligations and really these interoperability rules in the telecommunication sector that help a lot to enter in the aftermarkets, and here in the specific case for the financial services sector. That in the end really leads to also a very dynamic financial services sector where we see a vast diversification of the services, plus of course also really static efficiencies as we are lowering prices, so payment systems become more and more cheap, and also we come up with a variety of different solutions in digital finance solutions in Senegal. So if it comes to better providing access to finance, so if it comes to R&D and access to credit and R&D and financing, this is already helping a lot in that regard. But nonetheless, there are also high regulatory burdens under the data protection law. Here really administrative requirements of going firstly to the authority, filing specific applications, and that of course takes a lot of time and investment, and that is something that is continuously being raised as one of the main hurdles for further innovation in that regard. And another aspect is that also the traditional rules of the banking system are not really fit for purpose for the innovative business model that are currently occurring in the financial services sector. So we either have the issue of hampering financial innovation, or that's the second point, it might actually cause also financial stability risks, because in case of now blockchain applications and crypto assets that might enter the market, that might also have a huge impact on financial stability in this regard, and is also currently been discussed on a political level here. The interfaces with climate change, as we are today looking also at this particular topic. Professor Drexel mentioned it again, it's always hard to speak after him because you get all of the points already been taken, and he said that already, but there is a huge interdependence of the SDGs. And that is also what you can see here very, very nicely, that there is a close link between the digitalization of the agricultural sector, the financial services sector, and mitigating the effects of climate change. This relates first of all to the privately ordered business model in the agriculture that directly contributes to combating the effects of climate change, because the business model actively helps to make better use of the seeds, make actually productivity increasing in these sectors, in the agriculture sector, and that helps directly. And the second part also with regard to financial services, we see that they indirectly contribute to the process of digitalizing the agriculture sector, and this of course has already positive impact on climate change. And here access to capital, financial inclusions are the key aspects that we need to look at. And I think that is a wonderful example that, yeah, we really need to look at it holistically, comprehensively, and see and check the intersection of the different SDGs in that regard. Unfortunately, this is not yet been done, and we don't see that in the Senegal digital strategy as of now, but this is really one of the points where we should have a focus on. So what are the final remarks? Yes, looking forward, I think we already heard that there might be this leapfrogging moment in that regard, and we see that the entire legal system is not yet really designed for quite established and far-looking applications of data. I'm here talking about AI applications that require much more with regard also to cross-sectorial data access rules and data usage opportunities, and therefore what we suggest is that we should really be bold and we should design legal data governance frameworks and actively shape sustainable markets. That is a new regulatory paradigm, so not really focus on traditional market functional approach in that regard. We see that it works, but let's go beyond and really make use of what the potential in that regard is. So this relates then, of course, to the design of an open data governance framework. What do we mean with open data governance framework? Here, again, question is, shall it be a public good? Shall it be maybe exclusively held by a couple of people, or shall then it be open for everyone? It shall be open for everyone, and I think that it is. We need clear rules on already existing legal frameworks. Non-personal data really needs to be addressed. It should reflect on data ecosystems. That is also what Professor Drexel mentioned in the very beginning. There are a lot of actors involved, plus data should be used cross-sectorial. Technological prerequisites need to be addressed, and we need a coherence of the overlapping regulatory legal framework. And in the end, privacy protection and innovation should go hand in hand. This does not mean that we necessarily need to balance, but we need to think them in combination, and privacy can also be an enabler of market-driven solutions. And I think that is what we should really take into account. Thanks a lot for you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Shraddha, and I was a part of the organizing team for the workshop that we organized in India, in Bangalore, in not so long ago in September. And so I will be here representing my team. Unfortunately, one of our team members is not even here. That makes me a bit sad, but I guess the show must go on. So. Yeah, I would try to, I have a very strict time limit of 10 minutes, so I'll try to keep it within the time limit to the best of my abilities. So basically, I would like to start with why did we choose Sustainable Development Goal number 3, which is good health and well-being. And basically, we did that for a plethora of reasons, but the most important ones for us were that the progress of India on attaining Sustainable Development Goal, according to the Sustainable Development Report of 2022, has been reported as being insufficient. It is still in the red category where major challenges still remain. The second reason, and a very important reason, has been that India is set to become the world's most populous country by the end of the decade, overtaking even China. And added to that, India is undergoing a stage of demographic transition, and for the realization of the potential of India's demographic dividend, it is needed that forward-looking policies on healthcare are conceptualized at this stage. The other aspect which is extremely relevant to probably make the audience here aware about the healthcare sector in India is the fact that India's government spending on healthcare is barely 2% of the country's gross domestic produce in the financial year of 2022, according to the Economic Survey of India released by the Government of India. And as per the SDG Investor Map report for India that was released in 2020, 80% of service delivery in healthcare is through business models which are supported by the private sector. The healthcare industry in India, another major aspect in addition to the, of course, the social dimensions of good health and well-being, there is a huge market share because of the heavy involvement of the private sector in the Indian healthcare environment, and that is to the extent of 372 billion US dollars. I mean, we are going to be 1.4 billion people, so that seems quite all right, I guess. Now, to quickly just, before I get into what happened at the workshop, I would just briefly update you on the current policy developments in India. So India is one of the few countries now who is actually still trying to have a personal data protection bill, and this has gone through a long process of proposals, consultations, and then rejections. And currently, just shortly before, on November 18th, came out the most recent, very sort of trimmed down version of the personal data protection bill, and it is still open for public consultation. So I think the public consultation is ending on the 17th of December for that particular bill. Secondly, there had been in 2020 a draft report of expert committee on regulation of non-personal data. This is basically a pre-legislative stage. So before coming out for a regulation on non-personal data, they had an expert committee looking into the matters. They had some very interesting ideas that were mentioned there. So since it's just an expert committee report, it contains a lot of ideas and approaches that this policy making should be taking, and a law that should be informed by various concerns. I will mention a few of them later. Another important policy that recently released was the draft India Data Accessibility and Use Policy in 2022. One of, just because we are so short on time, I'll just mention one of the most interesting things. It actually talks about sort of maintaining data sets and proposes a future way of monetizing data and how that can be done. So that's extremely interesting because it is sort of not taken so well by the privacy and data protection experts in the country, saying that monetization of personal data could pose significant challenges. More specifically to health data, we have the revised health data management policy released in April 2022, and the National Health Authority has even released data sharing guidelines for a public health insurance scheme that has been launched recently in India, and this has all happened in 2022. So if you would just even look at the year, it's so much happening within the policy landscape in India. So now I move on to the findings from the Bangalore workshop, and so much like here and in Dakar, the conceptualization revolved on getting the stakeholders from business, from sort of public bodies, from academia, and from civil society to inform us of the ground situation. And in terms of businesses, we had what we observed was immense innovation that is ongoing in the field of digitization of healthcare that relies on data and the cutting edge use of it. We had a few very promising startups which presented their work and the business models that they have. And one of the very I'm just mentioning a few of them here, and an interesting one was Niramai Health Analytics, talking about early stage discovery of breast cancer in a non-invasive manner by using sort of image data which is fed into training of an algorithm that can then give sort of results for early detection of breast cancer in women. And in a country like India, where there is a lot of, let's say, societal prejudice surrounding asking for healthcare and diagnostic services, this is a very sort of very important contribution that is being made there. Another one is about digital health records locker. This is looped into what I will talk about later, which is India's push for digital public infrastructure. And then there was another startup which was an environmental intelligence startup, which sort of highlighted for us also this link between multiple SDGs. So this startup basically collects data from sensors, which is largely non-personal data, about the air quality in let's say in an urban area, and then depending on that they engage in collaboration with most recently with GlaxoSmithKline for coming up with sort of personalized prescription for people suffering from pollen allergies, so on and so forth. So there is a clear link between, let's say, SDG 3 and something that we would ordinarily think is related more to climate change, improving the air quality, reducing pollution, so on and so forth. Another very interesting initiative is the Art Park, which is a non-profit foundation which is providing technological support to the Indian Council of Medical Research to curate health data sets for India, mindful of underlying diversity challenges. So that has been initiated also just last month. So there's a lot happening in the field. Now coming to the insights that we received from the government bodies that were present there, and there we were sort of made aware of the initiatives towards building digital public infrastructure for providing digital public goods, and with inputs from both businesses and private stakeholders. So this is something in the Indian context which is built on India's stack, which they used for developing a universal payment initiative, which is for, let's say, for making digital payments easier, but they sort of translated the work that was done on the India stack in something that they're calling the India's health stack, which is talking about facilitating data sharing by unified health interface. And most recently, just yesterday, the National Health Authority has released a consultation paper on operationalizing unified health interface in India, which outlines questions regarding market rules that should govern this unified health interface network. I will quickly I don't know how much you're able to read from this, but this is the concept of the health stack in India. Right at the bottom are digital public goods like, let's say, Aadhaar, which is our digital identification number, which has biometric data with obvious data protection and privacy concerns, but it is just to show you the work that is being done, and for a country with the population that is for India, how important it is to have this sort of an infrastructure in place. And the key thing is that it has been developed by a cooperation between both businesses and the government. So this joint initiative in developing this digital infrastructure, I think is extremely unique to India. And so that's at the bottom. At the bottom is also something they call the digital empowerment protection architecture, which is sort of technologically providing the technological solution for addressing privacy and data protection issues. And then on top of that, they build things such as a health ID for not just for the individual who wants the healthcare, but also for doctors, so on and so forth, how this health information then can be exchanged. On top of that is what I mentioned in the previous slide, which is the unified health interface, which is about creating APIs for health services. So this is then a consortium of developers who are open to sort of utilize then the data that is available by developing sort of commensurate APIs which can help them to pull out the data from different sort of participants of participating in this particular program. This has right now it is only based on approval basis, so there are around 60 approved companies and startups that can utilize this at the moment, but the idea is to make it open. And that's why it's also important to keep in mind the consultation that I mentioned. So it's sort of like a sandbox approach that is happening right now, and they are trying to build a policy around this digital public infrastructure as and when they get more players and they get more evidence on what are the needs, how should this look in the future. And the most interesting idea of this unified health interface is that it is, instead of having a platform-centric model where there is a platform that will be at the core of this relationship between the providers and the patient, it has a more open network-centric model where, because of these open protocols that I mentioned previously. And this is something fascinating that is happening beyond just healthcare in India. And there's a paper written by my colleague, Dr. Vikas Kathuria, on open network digital commerce. And that is basically unbundling e-commerce in India and how that can be done in terms of like a technological push for getting it done and getting and onboarding stakeholders. So that's what's happening in India. It's extremely interesting to mention all of this. Now I hope you have a rough idea what is meant by a digital public infrastructure, because now India has the presidency of G20, and just in the beginning of December, when they had the inaugural meetings in India, they mentioned in the inaugural statement how they want to push for sustainable development goals through the digital public infrastructure approach. So I hope that this approach is coming to the center stage of the discourse of digital economy and that it gets more robust. Next, we talked with researchers and research institutions. I will be very quick with that. There was they highlighted the lost opportunity of data which is sitting idle without being shared. There was a huge issue of trust in terms of sharing data, and they also highlighted the topic of that how national data sharing is not sufficient for research purposes, and there is a dire need for international approaches for data sharing in that regard. Civil society raised privacy and data protection concerns, and also concerns about how it is important to conceptualize a development justice regime to address the invisible expulsions and the inequality in digital intelligence capabilities in global North and global South countries. So our key takeaways, as I said, were basically a lot of criticism from research and research institutions of government's policies during the pandemic. Then there was also an interesting thing while reading about the digital public infrastructure that we noticed that the unified health interface does not have that much of a stakeholder input, or almost none to my knowledge, with research stakeholders. It is more focused on businesses as of now. Then there are obvious data protection and privacy concerns. However, they are also sort of conceptualized to be addressed by the health stack by way of providing a technological solution. What I mentioned earlier, the data empowerment protection architecture. However, in light of because there is still no data protection act that can govern the legal aspects or set
sort of baseline principles that need to be adhered to, having such a sort of an architecture is sort of in a legal vacuum. And the current digital personal data protection bill in India is posing more challenges than solutions. And let's see how that goes. Now, coming back to the role of data in achieving sustainable development goals, I feel that, and I think it is quite obvious, that data is at the bottom of the pyramid, leading then to the intelligence that will power the digitization, which will move towards the fulfillment of the sustainable development goals. But something is missing here. And I think that's why this project has come together, to figure out how can we have another level below it to enable data sharing, and how can that be done. And that's the goal of conducting these workshops, to talk with the people on the ground and the stakeholders, and then analyze those takeaways. So completing this pyramid, there are a few ideas and some thoughts arising from discussions, and one of the most important one is that it is extremely important to establish a legal basis, and if data is considered as a resource, there is need for a sound legal basis for a resource transfer to actually happen, be it, and more so when it has to be done in a mandatory way. And it is crucial where the data sharing has to compete with variety of other rights like IP, trade secrets, or personal data protection. In India, a strand of discourse focuses on collective data rights. This was also mentioned briefly in the it sounds strange, but it was mentioned in the non-personal data expert report, but it was more about how this aggregated data can be used for community good, and who would hold the rights to this data. So that's an interesting approach. It's still to be developed, but it exists, and that's where they are leaning in India, the Indian policy circles. Another important thing is to maybe look at India's approach in that aspect to the European health data spaces approach, and how that works. That would be an interesting venture for us to undertake. Next, I think, just as I say that it's just some food for thought, I think in the context of emerging economies, and especially for India, it is extremely important to ensure meaningful accountability through independent institutions. I mention this because although there is again this data protection bill, it's extremely diluted in terms of an authority or of an institution that could actually sort of enforce and provide expertise to other regulatory bodies, which is something that we have in the EU. We have the European Data Protection Board, we have the European Data Protection Supervisor, and they are informing, for example, the conversation that happens for something like the development of the health data spaces. So there is this feedback loop that's existing, and in the Indian case, it doesn't seem to be going in that direction, and that's why I highlight that it's extremely important. Finally, I guess the goal is to ensure some sort of regulatory cooperation that would rely on pillars that were already mentioned, which are very crucial for the digital economy. So competition, innovation, and the responsible use of data, which is feeding into different legal disciplines, as you can imagine. Finally, choosing the Sustainable Development Goal 3 was also extremely interesting, because you see that there is one goal that is feeding into the rest of the 16 goals, and how important it is then to have this cross-sectoral data sharing as well. So there is a focus on sectoral approaches to data sharing, and it's extremely important to have those learnings, but I think that there is time, time is coming where we have to also really think, bit further into the future and figure out of some cross-sectoral approaches. Finally, and at the end, at the request of the organizers, I open this question where that's what I guess we want to all be able to work towards. as one of the goals of this project is how can the SDG framework inform law and policy making in the context of data sharing? What can we learn from that? And is there something new that can be incorporated in that? Or is it just sort of going in circles? Thank you so much for being so patient and holding on to your coffee break for me. And I'm really looking forward to the rest of the workshop. Thank you, and see you in the coffee break.
Thank you, Shraddha. Thank you, Jorg. Thank you, More. Yes, indeed, we had 2 great workshops in Dakar and Bangalore. Now, I would like to invite you for a 20-minute coffee break. We will start at 12 noon, 12 p.m. Brazilian time, sharp, okay, with panel 1. And then we have the introduction to the workshop in Brazil just after lunch before panel 2. See you 12 noon, please.